Hey there, welcome to Pepper Geek. In this video, I'll show you how to make our delicious spicy bread and butter pickles. If you like the combination of sweet and spicy as much as I do, then you're gonna love this recipe. These pickles come out so crunchy and delicious with the perfect touch of heat. It really is a keeper. This recipe is really quick and simple. You can harvest your veggies out of the garden and get it done the same day. Also, this recipe can be preserved by canning it in a water bath, so you can save these for the long term. It does taste better if you allow them to sit in the refrigerator for a little bit of time, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. So with that, let's get started with the ingredients. First, you'll need about 2 pounds of pickling cucumbers, and I do highly recommend using pickling varieties specifically because they're bred to have the right characteristics. You can, of course, pickle other varieties, but they may end up getting mushy over time, whereas pickling cucumbers tend to stay crisp for longer. Next, you'll need 2 jalapenos, and in this case, I do have 1 green jalapeno, but also 1 beautiful red Fresno that I just harvested from the garden. Crystalline's plant is just pumping out these gorgeous, crisp red peppers, so I thought I'd add a little bit of color to this recipe. 1 small yellow onion, which I also just picked from the garden. Next, we have our spices, which will go into the brine. 1 tablespoon of whole yellow mustard seeds, a half a teaspoon of turmeric, a 1/4 teaspoon of celery seed, and about a 1/4 teaspoon of whole cloves, which comes out to about 6 to 8 cloves. You'll need 2 cups of sugar, and I know that seems like a lot, and well, it is, but bread and butter pickles are known for their sweetness. You'll also need 2 tablespoons of pickling salt, 3 cups of apple cider vinegar, and 1 cup of water. And of course, you'll need some jars to keep your pickles in. This makes between 3 and 4 pints of pickles, so I'm gonna start with 3 of these pint-sized wide mouth ball jars. And you'll need a medium pot to boil up the brine. Now, one thing I'll be doing today, which is optional, but it does keep your pickles nice and crisp for longer, and that is sweating the ingredients for a few hours before we add the brine. You don't have to do this, you can just add the salt directly to the brine, but in order to do the sweating process, you'll need a medium bowl and some space in the fridge. So with everything we need, let's get started making our pickles. So to start, we want to chop off the ends of our cucumbers and slice them into about 1/4 inch rounds, and then toss the rounds into a bowl. Try to get the rounds as uniform as possible. That will lead to the most uniform pickling as well. Now, if you plan on sweating the vegetables first, which I will be doing, add a little bit of the salt as you go. So sprinkle in some after a couple of cucumbers, and then keep chopping. A little more salt. Next up, slice the peppers into the same sized rounds. You can remove the seeds, and I'm gonna do that with this Fresno just because they're so loose in this pepper. About 1/4 inch rounds. These jalapenos are so crisp. Whew. Toss them in with the cucumbers. Same with the Fresno. And lastly, peel and slice the onion into thin slices. I like to slice the onions a little bit thinner too. And in they go. And lastly, finish it off with the rest of the salt. Now this part's important. Mix it up nice and thoroughly. Make sure that salt is evenly coating all of the ingredients that are in the bowl. And this process is called sweating. It draws out some of the moisture from the vegetables, and that will help more of the brine get into the vegetables and keep them crisp over time. For the purposes of this video, I'll just sweat them for a little while, but ideally you should let them sit for a few hours in the fridge. But after just a little time, these have sweated nicely. There's a lot of liquid underneath here, so I'm gonna drain these without rinsing and just pat them dry with a paper towel. You can see they've sort of gone a little bit translucent. They're a little more bendy than they were when we first chopped them. And that, again, is gonna hold on to more of that crispness. So with the veggies sweated and pat dry, we just need to pack them into our jars and make the brine. So again, this should make about 4 pints, but I'm gonna try to fit it into 3 here. And you just wanna kind of evenly distribute everything, get some cucumbers and those red Fresnos and the jalapenos and onion, and pack them until there's about a 1/2 inch of space at the top. To make the brine, add the vinegar and the water to a medium pot and put it over high heat. Add the sugar and all the spices and stir regularly until that sugar is dissolved. For the cloves, you do have the option of putting them directly into the jars instead of into the brine because it can be hard to evenly distribute all of these spices into each of your jars when pouring the brine in. Once it reaches a boil, remove it from the heat. So the brine is fresh off the stove. It's still steaming a little bit here, and I'm gonna pour it over the vegetables, trying to evenly distribute the ingredients in the brine in each of the jars. Now I'll just use a chopstick to go around and release any air bubbles that are trapped underneath, and top off with brine as needed. If you notice one of the jars has more cloves than the others, you can just quickly move them and make sure that each of the jars has a few cloves in there. That's going to infuse into the brine over time and add flavor to the pickles. We do have some leftover brine, so you don't want to let that go to waste. I like to put this aside in an additional ball jar and save it for the next round of cucumbers if you're growing them yourself. If you don't have an immediate use for it, it will last for quite a while just sitting in a jar because it's primarily vinegar based. So the next time you have something you'd like to pickle, you can bring it to a boil again and pour it over the chopped veggies. So with about a ½ inch of head space, you can cover up the jars and tighten them down. And we want to let these cool at room temperature for at least an hour or two. You want to bring them all the way up to room temp before putting them in the refrigerator. Otherwise, you're going to risk the jars shattering if you cool them down too quickly. Once they're cool, throw them in the fridge, and they should last for several weeks. I recommend waiting at least 2 or 3 days before consuming them. I've noticed quick pickles like this have a bit of a weird taste if you eat them too soon, so you want to let that vinegar and sugar and all the flavors from those spices to penetrate into the cucumbers and the peppers and meld, and they'll be delicious after just a few days. But I wouldn't think of finishing this video without doing a taste test. This is another batch from the same recipe that I made about a couple weeks ago, and I'm gonna eat one. So as you can see, the turmeric kind of colors the pickles a beautiful shade of yellow. These are delicious on sandwiches or fried chicken, even on salads, but my favorite way to enjoy them is on their own. Unbelievably tasty. They're sweet, of course, but they have that beautiful crunch, amazing tanginess from the apple cider vinegar, and just the right amount of spice to them. And don't forget, you can eat all of the peppers and onions as well. So if you're making hot dogs or hamburgers, throw a little bit of everything into a bowl and use them as a topping. If you do make this recipe, please leave us a star rating on our website. I'll leave a link to the recipe in the description, and you can also print the recipe from there as well. Thanks so much for watching Pepper Geek, and I'll see you next time. And lastly, finish off with woo! Those onions. And lastly,